in 1966 and as assistant sports information director, and my primary time at that time was to travel with the basketball team, and that's where John was, doing all the basketball games. So that's where all the stories were. Whenever you were on a basketball trip at that time, we played 2 games on the road and 2 games at home in a round robin, and there was plenty of time and plenty of stories. But I think the most important thing say about John was this: people fail to realize how important radio was in the beginnings in the 60s of Tennessee athletics. You didn't have every game on TV. You had a few basketball games, but the radio across the state was a big part of what built this fan base that we so much enjoy these days. Part of that was when I first started, I would take individual tickets. Bill Penny and I would take individual tickets to all these small towns: Trenton, Huntington, West Tennessee, Covington, Oliver, and drop off tickets to single games and radio spots and things, and create fan base all across the state. And radio was their connection because there weren't a lot of television games, and it was a big part of it. Lindsey Nelson started the Tennessee Radio Network back in 1951, and we built on that network with individual stations. And by the 60s, when John became active with it, it became a huge part. And that's a part, even though television, all the games are on right now, our fans related to his voice, to what John's calls were. He was Tennessee. He was the person they could see and knew about what was going on with the games. And to me, that's where his legacy lies, in that ability to do that. Stories abound all over the place with John. He has a nickname for everybody. My nickname, he called me Catfish. I don't know where he came that from, but we had a lot of fun and a lot of travels, and certainly Tennessee. I think John Ward was gracious with the fans. He was very gracious with fans. We would meet people everywhere, and he was always gracious. They always realized they knew who he was. That's John Ward. John may not know them by name, but he was gracious with them, and that was a big part of it because they were. I've always felt like basketball was his true calling. He was a tremendous basketball announcer in my mind. And his first game he was working for the Knoxville Journal, and he did a high school game because he was covering it for the Knoxville Journal. And at this high school game, they didn't have anybody to do the announcer didn't show up, so John called that game as a cub reporter, as he called it, for a high school game. And from that point on, that began a career in broadcasting. He used to do obviously the public address at Neyland Stadium as starting before he became the network announcer. So he had a lot of places that he fit into. But basketball, he had a way of letting you know where the ball was on the court. Was it left wing, right wing? He identified the players, and you feel like you could see the game through his call. And to me, he was good in football, had a lot of cliches there, but I believe basketball, in my mind, was really where he is stoned. I remember one time we played in the Great Alaska Shootout, and we had a football game here. DeVoe was the coach then. And so we were playing an Alaska Shootout, and Ward wasn't going to Alaska for us to play in that tournament, so we had a football game that weekend. So he said, "Ford, you are going to do the announcing." I said, "John, I can't do the announcing." He said, "Well, you're going to do the announcing." And we, at the time, UAB was in that same tournament, and the announcer for UAB was a guy named Gary Sanders. And so Ward and Gary Sanders had been in Knoxville and at times called some local stuff here, so he was a very good announcer. And so Ward talked Gary into doing the Tennessee games. Well, that was pretty easy because all I had to do, all the equipment, I just set up, get the commercials and all that. Well, then Tennessee played UAB. Well, that became a different scenario because UAB had their lead-in, their pregame show, and Ward had this monoculous large lead-in show. I mean, we had all kinds of breaks, and so I'm trying to run all this, get all this stuff done until we get the broadcast where Gary could take over. So we finished the thing, and I said, "Ward, this radio stuff's not as easy as you thought it was, is it?" And I remember him, and he's still kidding me that it was the worst broadcast he'd ever heard in his life, and I said, "You're probably correct."
But he was an ad exec. Did he aspire to be a radio guy, or did he kind of stumble into this a little bit? Or
I think he kind of stumbled into it. I think the high school thing was probably kind of where he said he got started, but then he had such a good voice in advertising. I'll give you another story. He used to do commercials, and one of the commercials he did was a commercial for the Hamilton National Bank of Marshtown, and it was about a savings account. So he comes to me, and I'd been working in the athletic department a couple of years, just got out of college, and he says, "You're going to be Johnny Appleseed." I said, "I'm going to be Johnny Appleseed?" "Yeah, you're going to be Johnny Appleseed." So we go up to Cosby, to an apple farm up there. I had big overalls on. He rubs dirt all over me and got a pole with a bag on it, and I played this Johnny Appleseed in this commercial for Ward. And then he told me too. He says, "You don't have a future in television, I'll tell you that." But an interesting person, very talented in a lot of ways. Certainly the skills that he brought to the athletic department were lasting. Starting the radio shows, starting the television broadcast, coaching shows and basketball shows with Ray Mears. He did the Ray Mears show with a guy named Ben Bird, longtime Knoxville Journal writer, and then he started doing Coach Dickey's football shows. Those were forerunners to what people were doing, and his advertising background, uniqueness of that, the ability to move it across the state in a lot of different ways, were all important facets of growing Tennessee. And that's what endeared him, I think, so much to the fans. They all knew him, and he was certainly gracious with them.
For someone like me, I grew up in '97, but I grew up knowing the name John Ward. What do you think it was that made him so special to even the younger generation?
Well, I think, number one, he was an announcer of a prominent school. I think that had a lot to do with a lot of interest in our fan base. But I think more importantly, John was accessible to his fans. When he was out, whatever, he was gracious, and that's a big part of endearing you to who you are. He wasn't this rock star, so to speak, although he probably was, but he was very gracious, and I think that's why people endeared to him. Students on campus, he'd walk across campus, he'd speak with people all the time, and that was good, because he felt that was a responsibility of him as a representative of the university, which he was.
But I know they were doing different things during home games, but what was John's relationship with Bobby Denton?
With Bobby Denton?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were longtime friends, I think, and obviously Denton took over the PA after John. Mm-hmm. They were kind of in a business where they shared some things, advertising. He was with Davis Newman and Payne and some of those things, and I know they were good together in a lot of different ways. And Bobby brought his own cliches. That's part of an announcer. They bring their own things that they want to say and bring it to that. And I think that's an important part too.
Any good?
For that 98-99 year, what did it mean to have him on the call for that championship season?
Well, I mean, if you're going to go out, always go out on top, and that's what he felt about it. Once they won that championship, I think he and Bill Anderson felt like that was the time that they were going to stop doing that. He did finish up with the basketball season. That's the best point in time to end. He never. Everything else was going to be down from there. If you look at it right now, certainly, it's been a long time since that '98 championship. We're going to celebrate that this year. 20 years this year, I guess. So, time flies quicker than we think.
What about Gus Manning and John Ward stories? Anything stand out between those two?
They were interesting. Obviously, Gus and Gus is a major part of it. Now, Gus will turn 95 July the 9th. And July the 8th, rather. And so certainly they were part of what we were doing. Gus, the patriarch, I guess, of everything. I mean, he handled everything around here. And he and John were obviously involved in a lot of different things, Of course, Gus and Haywood had a radio show called The Locker Room. And that was, they competed a little bit, I guess, with Ward and some of this stuff, because that show, it's 58 years, I guess, if we end up doing it again this year. We did it last year, but they're interesting there. John's a unique kind of guy. He was quiet in some ways, but I saw a lot of different sides of him. I mean, I was the brunt, being the traveling secretary for basketball. I was the brunt of some of the things that he would pull. I mean, they tried to get me arrested down in Mississippi one time. But they came and stole all the bed sheets off the bed, and I knew that he and AW were up to it. So I go over and knock on their door, kind of beat on their door, and they've called security, and they made this story I was going to be locked up in the jail at Ole Miss and would miss a game and whatever. But there were just a lot of things, unusual things. One of the topics, and it's a local thing here, but we were at Jack Tar Capitol House in Baton Rouge, and this was in 1968, and we just started the swimming program. And our announcer at the time, who helped John Ward, was a guy named Lowell Blanchard, a famous person here, music guy, worked the radio, excellent, and knew a lot of people, Chet Atkins and all that. But John Ward did an interview with Lowell Blanchard as if Lowell Blanchard was Coach Woodruff, who was the athletic director, and they did this interview. It's probably the funniest interview I've ever seen. But there was always something stirring. Ward would be walking somewhere, because you had plenty of time. When you played on Saturday night and then you played on Monday, you had, Saturday afternoon, you had all day Sunday and all day Monday, and so there was always something going, always something going.
What's your favorite call of his?
Sorry?
What's your favorite call of